Welcome to Learning to Glow, a show about wellness, skin health, and self-development. I'm your host, Jess. I'm a mom, entrepreneur, and skincare expert. I'm so excited to share tips on how to achieve healthy skin and bring amazing guests in the field of health, fitness, aging gracefully, and personal growth. Let's explore all different ways we can take care of ourselves as women, both inside and out, to truly shine. So let's get glowing. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode. I'm so happy that you are here with us today. We have such a great episode. I really love when we have a topic we have not touched upon before, and a guest like we have today. So I can't wait to talk about that. I also have been talking to a lot of experts about perimenopause, and we have some really great episodes coming up on this topic. I'm personally experiencing symptoms in this time in my life, and I'm learning a lot. I'm really looking forward to sharing that as well with you, and what I have been going through, and just things that I've been learning, and great conversations that I have had with different people, different experts about our hormones and just this time in our life, and you know, particularly being in perimenopause. So it's been very interesting, but I have had some weight issues, and loss of weight loss is very challenging for me over the last few years, and I have lost some weight, and I've been, excited because I've been struggling with this for such a long time. So I'm still on my journey. I'm not at my goal yet, but really excited about what I've learned so far. And I'm really excited to share it with you because I've talked to a lot of women who are also dealing with these types of issues. So make sure that you are following along the podcast by subscribing in whatever app that you are currently using to listen to this podcast. And you will find out, you'll get updates on when the podcast is dropping. So I've also been trying some new products along the last, few months. And I'm going to just put that in the show notes, some of the things that I'm loving at this moment. I'll talk about those later, but I'll put everything so it's very easy to find in the show notes. And, like I have a new favorite coffee that I'm enjoying and why I'm enjoying it. So make sure to check out the show notes after you listen to the show today. As far as today's episode, I'm chatting with Jennie Crooks. She's an anxiety and OCD specialist. She just released a new book, Look Up. We are diving into digital minimalism and how our screen time affects our mental health and ways to create a healthier relationship with technology, especially for those of us with kids. And we talked about our kids. We talked about teens and how we can have these conversations, how we can model for our children what that looks like to do this in a healthy way. It's very challenging. This is something that can be a big topic in a lot of families these days. And so I really love the tips that Jennie shared with us. Make sure to share this episode with someone that is in your life that can benefit from it, because this is just filled with really, really great tips for, not only just for us as parents, but for ourselves. So I hope you enjoy this episode, and here is Jennie. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Learning to Glow, and welcome our guest, Jennie Crooks. How are you?
I am doing okay, holding it together and just living my curly hair life.
I know. It's so funny. When I see a fellow curly haired woman, I'm always like, tell me about your hair. There's always like a story there, and yours is so beautiful. So I had to comment. I love it.
Well, thanks for having me on. I'm looking forward to being here today.
We haven't really talked about this on my podcast, and you're a licensed social worker and you're an author, and you're going to share with us what you do, but you talk about how we are online, screens that we have for not only us as adults, but our kids, our teenagers. So I'd love if you could talk to us about what you do and your area of expertise, and then we can talk about this topic because this is so important, and I feel like a big problem right now.
Yeah, agreed. So my name is Jennie Crooks. Like you mentioned, I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I am an anxiety and OCD specialist, and I run a private group practice out of Washington State. And, I recently wrote a book called Look Up. It's a 30-day path to digital minimalism and real life maximalism. And it was born out of this experience I was witnessing in my clinic where a lot of my clients who were really, really anxious would use their smartphones in a way that would just sort of like eject them from the present moment, right? Like it's a really easy way to get out of uncomfortable things. It's a really easy way to not be bored or to like get entertained, right? And I started seeing it regularly enough that I started putting my clients on this like a digital nutrition plan where we would really examine what um, added value to their life in their digital world and the things that would just like suck them dry and make them feel like they had been eating fried chicken for 5 days, which love a little fried chicken here and there, right? Like don't get me wrong, but like only eating fried chicken, not a sustainable diet. And so I started noticing this pattern of, we call it experiential avoidance, right? Like just trying to avoid the experience of whatever it is, whether it's emotional or like what's happening out here. And then I noticed I was doing it, right? And it wasn't necessarily, it's funny because you see somebody else do something and you assume, right, that like that's how it's functioning. And then you do it and you're like, oh, maybe it's a little bit more expansive than my assumption, right? And I found that when I was doing it, it was really this autopilot thing, which led me to believe that a lot of my clients were using it in an autopilot way as well, right? Not just this like intentional avoidance thing. And so I noticed that I did it, and I did it in a very like I sort of get sucked into it in very specific moments, right? Like there are contexts where it's easier to slip down that digital slide. Um, but there were certain things that like would suck me in pretty easily, and certain conditions I would be in where I would get sucked in a little bit more easily. And so I wrote this book, thinking, there's got to be something to help us start to change our behavior in a way that is non-pathologizing, right? Because this isn't like a you're sick in the head kind of issue, right? Like this is like the phone is designed to suck you in, and our brains are designed to do things that feel really good and that are like tasty, appetitive. And so I wanted to create this challenge, this experience where you could sort of in the same vein as like a dry January, right? Like you could take this challenge and you could gently wean off all of the digital consumption and only have the things from the digital world that are actually adding value to your life and making it a meaningful experience. So, which is a very long-winded way of saying that, like, yes, this is a problem. This is a problem for all of us. This is a problem for our kids. This is a problem for our parents. And this is not necessarily a problem that says there's something wrong with you, in as much as it is something that we're just being hijacked. And wouldn't it be nice to come back and have some agency in our lives?
Yeah, I mean that you're what you said is so true. I mean, the ways that the apps are designed and our phone is designed, it is highly addicting. And I see it with the video games, and I know because I'm an adult now, but I see I'm like, "Oh, you got to like log in at 7 if you want to collect a star." And like I'm just like, "Oh, it's so clear to me," but my kids are like, "I need to do this. Like it's crucial that I collect that star." And like
Yeah.
get
Yes.
this point on my whatever game. And it's just like they're so smart, they're
Yeah.
so genius in how they do it that it's pretty hard to avoid. So you work with people who I want to talk about anxiety a lot, because
Yeah.
so the people that you're dealing with in your clinic have anxiety. So what came first? Did you notice they have anxiety and then you realize, could this overconsumption lead to more anxiety? Or did you see it at first as like, this is like a coping mechanism for it? Like you had mentioned, I mean, it's like anything. If we are in a situation that we want to, or an emotion that we want to get out of, it could be alcohol, it could be shopping, it could, whatever it is. And it could also be really easily just getting online and numbing that way.
Yeah, it's a great question. So, from an evolutionary standpoint, we all have anxiety, right? Like, if you have a prefrontal cortex that is working and functional, then chances are you can conceptualize a time in the future where there is some threat. And that's really all that anxiety is, right? Is being able to anticipate a threat that may or may not be coming. And it's designed to elicit some motion out of you, right? Like, emotion. And so when anxiety shows up at us, it's designed to make us act. It makes us plan. It makes us prepare. It makes us, start the wheels of movement so that we can prevent or at least mitigate whatever threat is coming down the pipeline, right? So just from a like basic human standpoint, we are all anxious, and thank God, right? Like if you really think about it, like I don't know if you've been with a toddler lately. I don't know how old your kiddos are, but like my toddler is not anxious at all about anything right now, right? Like we're on the side of the street. She's like, I'll walk in the middle of the street, no problem, right? Like no concept of cars that are coming that could just like kill her and rip her from our lives, right? And so when we don't have anxiety, it actually becomes problematic, right? Like that is concerning. When we are responding to our anxiety in a way that isn't helpful, like when we identify anxiety as the problem, like, oh, I shouldn't feel anxious, we actually feel more anxious because now the threat is inside of us. And we think that we have to get rid of this thing that happens that's like very evolutionarily helpful. And we're not going to get rid of it, right? Like unless we like sever your prefrontal cortex, which is ill-advised in my practice. We don't advise that. And my malpractice insurance won't cover it either. And so, the real problems with anxiety show up in how we respond to it and how we manage it. And so for my clients, every human is anxious. And when people come to me, it's largely because the way that they're responding to their anxiety is creating some sort of life impairment, right? So in the example of like a social anxiety, as an example, you feel anxious about going into a social situation. You think that you're going to be judged, right? And so what people usually do when that's their experience is they'll go into situations and they'll look down into their phone because they feel nervous, which prevents them from having the opportunity to check in with how it's actually going in the environment, right? Because your attention is in your phone and you don't have an opportunity to see people's eyes or to like see their faces and see, are they actually judging me, right? To do that sort of like evidence-based fact checking, like is the thing that I'm afraid of actually happening, right? Because they're glued into their phone. So we use our phones as this way to get out of feeling anxious. Like, oh, I won't feel anxious if I just look down here. I avoid the thing that makes me anxious. But by doing so, you can't actually determine if it's a threat. And so then next time you go into that situation, our brains start to think that it's the phone that kept us safe. Oh, thank God I had my phone, because otherwise I never could have made it through that, that meeting or that first date, right? Or if you're a parent, right? Like, thank God I had my phone because otherwise I never could have made it through the end of dinner or whatever it is, right? And so then you start to rely on this. We call it a safety behavior. You start to rely on this, and so we need to take this away so that we can see, like, can you actually tolerate the feelings of anxiety? Are the people that you're afraid of judging you actually judging you? Don't know. Wouldn't it be great to know? And we get to do that reality testing. And so that's a very specific example, but it happens in a lot of different domains with phones and with anxiety, where I think another place where I see it quite a bit is in people who show up with some sort of like distorted, dysmorphic body issue, right? And so we show up, we think like, oh, I hate my body, I'm so fat. And then we get online to check, right? Like I'm just gonna like look for some like quick ways to get rid of this. Like I had 2 C-sections. So I have that little like that C-section lip from the scar, right? I'm just going to get online and look at different ways to get rid of this like C-section scar little lip. But what happens is I end up exposing myself to all of these bodies that are not necessarily realistic, that likely haven't had C-sections, that definitely haven't been alive for almost 42 years, right? And are doing their best to survive on like Trader Joe's quick dinners, right? Like we're doing the best we can up here, right? So I get exposed to all these things, and then I see it and I think, oh gosh, it is me. I should do something, and then I close out. And so it keeps that anxiety going, and it doesn't actually lead me to make any sort of behavioral changes, like going on Instagram and looking at different bodies and like getting caught in that compare and despair thing never leads me to eating another salad right? Like it will lead me to doing weird, like leg lifts against the wall or like whatever the new thing is. And then being really upset when that lip on my C-section isn't gone in 7 minutes, right? I'm like, but it's that fast, And so, yeah, anxiety isn't necessarily the thing that's leading us there as much as it is our intolerance of feeling anxiety and then using a smartphone or a tablet or social media as a way to not feel anxiety. But then it actually just keeps us stuck in this loop of anxiety. So,
Oh, that's so good. Okay, I want to ask a question. I'm trying to figure out like the best way to ask that because there's so many things I want to ask you about this. I'm going to bookmark my teenager question. And I want to, since we're on the topic of anxiety, I want to ask you about the other mental, like our mental health. You hear a lot about that. This is bad for our mental health. Being online is bad for our mental health. You gave some really good examples right there. But how else can maybe not even just going online to seek out validation or confirmation or whatever, but just being online too much and like that overuse, how can that affect us, not just with anxiety, but like overall? And I'm sure if that person or your example of, I'm going to go on real quick and see like for my body, that could lead to, I could imagine some sad feelings, comparison and all of those things. But what else do you see with that overuse?
I think that a lot of times we are getting online when we feel this pull for connection, right? Like I want to see what people are doing. I want to know, like I'm missing my buds. And we get online and it quiets that pull just enough. And then we get swept into other things. And then suddenly there's cat videos and all of the like the cognitive errors that lead us down that like overuse slide, right? But it's the pull for connection that draws us in there. I think that's my experience quite a bit when it comes to social media, right? Like I want to, like, what are they doing? If we let that pull grow, so say we don't use social media, if we let that pull grow and grow and grow, we become more likely to actually reach out in a way that is satisfying and nourishing, right? But if we keep using social media as the vehicle for connection or feeling connection, it's like eating cookies only, right? Like, yes, you can stay alive. No, like my toddler right now, like living almost entirely on hot cocoa, right? And okay, like this is it is not ideal, but we're just trying to get fat into this baby and like that's fine for right now, right? But that is not a good long-term plan, right? And so we're starting to say like, okay, you got to wait for hot cocoa until 5 minutes into the meal, and so we don't give it to her, right? So she can actually start to feel that hunger and make some different decisions, right? So social media really is doing this. It's like short circuiting this like really important human pull for connection. And if we don't feel that at its full intensity, we don't actually go out and try to get connected. And there's pretty serious consequences to not having social connections for us humans as social beings, right? Like there are really negative impacts for us in old age. And loneliness is one of the greatest challenges that we face, not just like from a mental health perspective, but from a physical health perspective and from like a community perspective. And so, there is this issue where it is making us more anxious because we're not getting a chance to see if, we can tolerate the anxiety, but it is making us more lonely in that sense where it's preventing us from going out and getting the connection that we need. And then what happens with our brains is that we come up with all of these narratives to explain why this is better and why we can't or shouldn't or don't need to go out and make these social connections. I see it a lot with like a parallel process a lot with my clients with ADHD, where a lot of us who have ADHD will, a lot of us who are adults who have ADHD have like undiagnosed ADHD or have a late in life diagnosis, right? And what we have come to believe about ourselves is that we are lazy or stupid or like just bad at this. I'm just bad at that, right? And it's really hard to wrap our head around this idea that actually like our brain functions in a very different way. And it's the way that our brain works that has contributed to these executive function deficits, right? Like these issues in planning and prioritizing and working things through like that, and staying on task, right? And so we come up with these really negative um, narratives about who we are instead, right? Like, oh, well, I'm bad, I'm stupid, I'm this, I'm this. And those are things that contribute like a ton to depression, right? And so it all works together in this really complicated way where like we have to feel the things that we're feeling, right? And we have to actually do the things that nourish us. And when we use little shortcuts, we don't have an opportunity to do that. And so yeah, so it's problematic with anxiety, it's problematic with depression, with body comparisons, with a lot.
I want to go back to that example that you gave with the social anxiety, and you're going into a party and you're like using your phone as sort of a crutch to get through it. And it made me think of, so I want to talk about the kids, and I think when I was a kid, I didn't have a phone. We didn't have cell phones. We didn't have any of that. And so if we were hanging out with our friends, we were really with them. And I see now it's very different, even like I'm a carpool mom. And a lot of times the kids are just like on their phones. And like, I feel like there's, it's like that connection that you're talking about, like that we seek. And that is part of our biology. We need connection. It's just who we are as humans. But I see missed opportunities with these kids. So I want to ask you about that, and like how is this affecting our kids? Like my son, I think my son was born the year that, I can't remember if it was the iPhone or the iPad. One major discovery was created like the year he was born. And so his whole life has been with technology and devices and the ability to watch a show whenever you want, as many as you want. We didn't have that option when we were growing up. And that's a big question there, but also relationships with their peers. Like I can just see this being a huge issue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you hit the nail on the head in terms of missed opportunities, right? So when we are required to engage socially directly, not through a phone, not through a device, it actually raises the bar for social engagement, right? Like, and we have to overcome that hurdle. And when something is more difficult, when we put more energy into it, we also become less likely to dip out if something goes wrong, right? Like we have invested our heart into this thing. And so by golly, I'm going to make it work, right? Like, or I'm going to figure out what I need to do to make it work. But if there's really low investment, then we are much more likely to leave early, right? So if we think about it in terms of what that means for relationships, right? Like it's really easy to get on and follow somebody and to like or dislike or say something because there's absolutely no bar for participation, right? But to go up and talk to somebody in a class, it's actually really challenging. It is the way that we have evolved, right? Like it is our primary way of connecting. But like with kids now who have been born into a world where this is the way to connect. This is the way that their brains are wiring to connect, right? And so we really want to be mindful of how our kids are connecting, of how we're modeling connection for our kids. And we want to show them what it means to build a meaningful connection with somebody and to reap the rewards of that, right? They become less likely to leave if they've had to do some work to get into it.
Yeah, I love that. I think one example that I see with kids and communication and like relationships that has been a negative is like a text. They have these big group text chains, and some, text is not real life. You can never decipher, is this person mad at me? Are they throwing shade here, or what's going down with this text? And then you can interpret it a certain way. And I've seen drama because I'm like, oh, well, I read that and it was nothing like how you're taking it to be. We have to like it's almost like we need to really educate our children on these things too. I mean, obviously, and it happens to us. And you mentioned modeling. I want to talk about that because if we, and I know it starts with us, like if we are over consuming and overusing all of these devices and all the screens, it's not like we can come in and be like, you guys, you're doing too much here. Like, you need to stop. I'm good. Yeah. And I think that I'd like to ask you, how do we do that as parents for our kids? And then, I mean, that might go back. I guess the first question would be, how do we figure out how to like get ourselves in check? Because that's first, I feel like.
Yeah, I agree. And that's really why I wrote the book, right? I think there is a big movement with regard to children right now in terms of like limiting their phone access and limiting their social media access, which is wonderful and brilliant. And it's not something that is going to translate if we are also not modeling that. So if we're thinking about it in the same way that we think about like cigarettes, right? Like if you're telling your kid you can't smoke while you have a cigarette in your hand, I don't know. I grew up stealing my mom's cigarettes, and she did that in silence, right? Like she hid her cigarettes and she acted like we didn't know. Like, you can smell a cigarette, right? But like, it doesn't work to teach somebody that way, right? Because we are social creatures. We learn through modeling, right? And so, I think the challenge, my lookup challenge, is a wonderful way to start, right? Not to like do a shameless self plug, but just to acknowledge that changing our behavior is actually really, really difficult. And I've crafted the challenge so that it's 30 days of micro interventions. It's not 30 days of abstinence from your phone, right? I'm not a monster. I'm not unrealistic. You're done. But it helps you to really start to clarify what are the things that are important to you. And I think what we can do as like a small micro intervention with our kids is to get in the practice of when our kid walks into the room, if we're on the phone, to choose them, right? To put our phone down somewhere out of reach and to choose them. And if we're in the middle of something, there's a good chance that you can still put it down, right? Like, there's a really good chance that whatever you're doing at that point in time is not more important than the time you're going to spend with your kid, just realistically speaking. Maybe it is. Maybe you're a physician and you're on call and you're in the middle of something, but it's pretty unlikely. So a good micro intervention, a good small practice is to actually, when your kid enters the room, to look up, to acknowledge them directly, and to say something along the lines of like, hey, I'm going to put this down. I'm done with this for now, right? To make it a really clear, actionable thing that you're choosing to spend time with them in their like kid human suit instead of whatever online thing it is that you're doing, right? I think another small way that you can start to model how to use a phone is to include them in whatever it is that you're doing on the phone, right? Make it a shared experience. And if you're hearing this and you're like, I don't really want them watching the stuff that I'm watching, then like, I don't know, like maybe don't watch it right then. Like maybe you could do that later, right? Like, which isn't, I don't say this from a place of judgment, just as a place of like, there are shared meaningful opportunities for you available in the digital world, right? Like my 6-year-old and my husband have started to play Tony Hawk together on, like a game console. And they do it for a little bit. It's fun. And then they also like go out into the world and play with their skateboards, right? And so there's this like meaningful transition where she gets to do stuff in the Tony Hawk skate world and he gets to do stuff, and then they get to go out and try stuff. And there's this sort of like overlap between what's happening in the digital space into the real life space, and they have conversations about it, and it's a much bigger thing, right? But by and large, when I'm doing the mindless Instagram scroll, I don't want my kids watching any of that content. And that says something, right? Like if you don't want your kids to do it, it's probably not great for you to do it either, for the most part, right? Like they're just little tiny humans, and we want to care for ourselves in the same way that we're caring for them. So
what advice would you give to parents who are, I mean, and there's so many different probably guidelines for different ages, obviously. But I know a lot of moms who their kids are getting older and they have a phone, and they maybe are giving their kids the opportunity to do social media at a really young age, or they just have a phone and they have access to everything. And then there's, other parents who are going to be like, okay, you have to wait till this age, you have to wait till this age, whatever it might be. Are there guidelines when it comes to like what you do specifically with, helping people reduce their overuse and just anxiety? Do you recommend certain things for, like, let's say teenagers or young teenagers, like people who are a lot of trend I've seen with, in my experience, has been like maybe you're 13 or you're 14 or you're 12 even, and you get a new iPhone. Like, what do you recommend?
I mean, I don't recommend giving your kid an iPhone anytime before 14.
Yeah.
I think that there are some pretty serious implications for that. And, I think if we think about the iPhone as a portal into the world, right? We don't drop our kids off in neighborhoods that we don't know and say, fend for yourself, right? And I think an iPhone is very similar. And so I also think that, there are some really great monitoring tools. And I think the truth is that our kids are way smarter than we give them credit for. And they're going to out tech us, right? Like 100% of the time, my daughter will be able to work her way around whatever intervention I put in place or barrier in tech. And she'll probably be able to hide her tracks too, realistically, right? Like kids are smart, right? And so I think it is unrealistic for us to give them a thing that is designed to pull them in and to capture and demand their attention. I think it's unrealistic of us to give them the thing and then say, stop using it in this way, right? I think the most realistic thing that we can do is to tolerate our own distress and say no until a certain age, right? And even at that certain age, there comes a lot of responsibility where it's like, if I'm going to give you this thing, we've had a lot of conversations about what is okay and what's not okay, what is real and what's not real. And I think that there's so much uncertainty that it's really difficult for me to imagine giving my kids any sort of smartphone. And I also say this as a parent of young kids, right? Like I have a 2.5-year-old and a 6-year-old. And so I am not at the point where I have to be like, I mean, my 6-year-old did ask for an iPhone and I just sort of like brazenly laughed in her face. Like, aha, like that's very sweet. But it was a good door open to like, look, these are the issues that I have with this thing. And, she's like, but why do you use it? Right. And so like having those conversations around what does this device mean to me? I answer work emails on it. I occasionally text with Auntie Lissa on it. I take a million photos of you two little coconuts with it. Right. And so being really intentional about what we use it for and modeling that if you, in the event you do decide to give your kid an iPhone, but cognitively, it's not good for their brains, right? And so like delaying that as long as you are able to tolerate the distress of saying no, because that's really what it's about, right? Is that like we have to tolerate saying no to our kids, right? It's they might go out and get it somewhere else, but like we have to tolerate saying no. And we have to tolerate them giving us the line about like, all my friends have it. I'm missing out on all these things. This is the only way that the cheerleading squad communicates. It's like, well, that may be true. And the answer remains no, right? And so it comes back to this place where I'm sure that there are other things that you've told your kids no. There should be other things that you have said no to your children about, right? Like, I hope you are saying no to your kids. And the more that you do it in a way that is like loving and kind and compassionate, the more skilled you get at tolerating that distress, because it is distressing to tell them no. Like nobody wants to disappoint your kids.
I almost feel like it's worse if you say yes and then you change your mind and you're like, okay, I messed up. I'm going to take this phone back. I almost feel like that would be much worse.
I mean, maybe more uncomfortable for us to be like, you know what? I made a huge mistake and I'm gonna undo it. But not
Sure.
impossible, right? Because think about what you're modeling in that instance, right? Like, we're going to try a thing, we'll see how it goes. And you get to model that, like, yeah, like mom makes mistakes sometimes. And this was a mistake. I see this is really hard for you. I see I have some unrealistic expectations of you. And I'm going to rein it back in. And I'm sorry. I know this is going to be hard for you to let go of. And this is the decision that I've made, right? So I think even if you have said yes, like owning that, like, actually this was a bad idea. I'm reining it back,
Yeah.
right? I'm reining it back. I think we can do that as parents, right? Like, you feed them Cheerios for dinner sometimes. Like, I can also take away the stuff that I gave them and be like, this was silly.
And this was
Also, I try to feed them other
yeah.
food.
Also, like, this was mine the whole time anyways. Like, that's kind of our
Yeah.
feeling about it. Like, this is not yours, we're letting you borrow it. And if it
Yes.
is a problem, then we most definitely will take it back. And the cool thing about I feel very lucky because my husband is in tech, and like, you can't really pull a lot over his eyes. So we're in a good position. I'm like, I'm so happy because, and I feel sorry for my kids, but I'm like, you can't get away with anything in this house.
Anything.
It's like, my husband is on to you guys. So I think it's really great for us to, I love the conversation of like being able to say no to our kids, and like, yeah, they might be disappointed, but also maybe telling them why. Like, this is, I mean, if you really do some research, I feel like there's more research now than ever as far as what are some of the repercussions for putting these phones in our young kids' hands. And I remember a really great documentary on Netflix that talked a lot about this. And I'm like, I would just be like, hey, I'm trying to protect you, and like, let's stay a kid as long as you can. And these are some of I'm very open with my kids. Like, this is why I'm doing what I'm doing. There's a lot of things that make my son unhappy when it comes to technology and our decisions, but it's because I know too much about this stuff and I've done my research on it. And so I'm okay with him being upset about it. Yeah.
And what a skillful thing to be able to tolerate as a parent, right? Like, I'm okay if you're upset with
Yeah.
me, and I'm going to be okay if you're upset with me. I'm doing this because I love you and my job is to protect you. This is not punishment, right? And so I think really coming at it from that stance, which is what I hear you doing, which is like, yo, I love you. This is why. And like, you can be mad at me and that's okay. Like, you're allowed to be mad at me. I'm your mom. It's probably not the last time I'm going to do something that makes you angry. So, like, you can be angry for a little bit. And, in the meantime, I will continue to love you and do the things that I can to protect you. So I think that's a really skillful response.
Thanks. We've talked about like some of the overuse and, what that looks like, but what do you think, in your experience, a more balanced approach to all of this is? I work on my phone. I'm on my phone so much. In fact, my 10-year-old went into my screen time and was like, what do you have to say about this, Mom? And I was like,
sick burn.
I was totally sick. But I was like, I listen to podcasts. I like all of that counts. And so my screen time does look high because of all of those things. But what do you think a more balanced approach looks like?
Yeah, I think the setup there is really beautiful, right? Because a balanced approach can be to say, yeah, it is really high. Let's sit down and look at how I'm using the beautiful shiny rectangle. And let's talk a little bit about mommy's job and the context in which I work. And let's really examine how these hours were spent and what they're doing for me. And then we can look at it around, like, how are you using this thing and what is it doing for you? And are there other ways to do the thing that you're doing with this, right? Like, smartphone, podcast, listening in the car. Yep, I'm here for it. I have a few that I'm just like, I am there every week religiously. I love it, right? I'm there. Sometimes I listen to it in the kitchen while I'm doing dishes. Sometimes I listen to it on my phone. Sometimes I listen to it on YouTube, right? Like, sometimes I'll watch the video. And so that gets to be a conversation piece. And so I think it's less about like, tell me the hours that I should fall in between. right? Because if it's like 3 hours of scrolling, of like mindless scrolling, then that's fried chicken, right? Like 3 solid hours of eating fried chicken did not win any contests, right? But like if you are on your phone for 3 hours doing Duolingo, right? Or like creating artwork or something that's like really deeply meaningful to you, beautiful. That's 3 hours of devoted, committed action aligned with your values, right? And so I think if we're looking for balance, what it really starts with is looking at the function of the behavior, right? Like, how are we using this thing? Does that action align with what's most important to me? And if not, do I actually need this? Right? Can I prune this out of my life? And if it does align, amazing. Can I include someone in this who might be watching me and let them participate in a way that's meaningful too, right? So like thinking about like what's the function? Does it align with our values? If not, pruning it, and if it does, figuring out how to bring people in. I think that's the like balancing and the like making meaning of this thing.
I love that. You mentioned creativity. I just want to ask about that really quick because
Mm.
can, and I'm thinking yes, but can being online too much like kind of stifle your creativity? Because, it's, if you're just online so much and you can't put it down, I can imagine that affecting your ability to create. And and especially if it's that fried chicken way of looking at it, you're kind of, your brain, I feel like, shuts off a little bit when you do that. So tell me, have you noticed anything about creativity and screen use?
Yeah, it's interesting because there's this movement in Australia and to get kids off social media, right? And it's really strong. It's gaining traction. And one of the arguments of kids down there is that it will stifle their ability to be creative if they don't have access to social media, right? Like, where will I do this thing that like is creative for me? Um, I think to your point, if you're always just
Yeah.
consuming, it's unlikely you're ever going to create, right? Like if you're always sitting at the table eating fried chicken, it's you don't have time to like wonder about how to pair things or how to like put things together or how to like what order to put things into the pot or the pan, right? Like in order to feel creative, we need a little bit of space.
Yeah.
Boredom is the best thing for creativity, right? Because you're just there watching the clouds, right? Like what a great opportunity for your mind to wander, like it does, they do, and for you to be captivated by some spark of imagination and excitement, right? Like there if we have things that are just shoved, we are just force fed grain all the time, we don't have an opportunity to have that spark. And so, I think there really is a fine line between like being exposed to things that inspire creativity, which might happen on social media, right? There's also a good chance that like you don't need that much, right? Like you don't need that much, right? Like you could also get that spark somewhere else, like by going to a museum or laying in a field or talking with a friend or just like laying in your room throwing paper at a plastic basketball hoop, right? Like there are so many different ways to let your mind find time for creativity and to find the juice that is creativity. And yeah, it's unlikely that you're going to get it if you're just like being force fed endless streams of content.
Yeah, and even if you start like with a goal and you're like, I want to, there's something that I want to cook. This happened to me yesterday. I'm trying to find a recipe for a dinner that I'm going to, and all of a sudden I'm like, I'm back at the cat videos. And I'm like, what happened?
Yeah.
It's so easy.
Yeah.
It's so easy to
Slippery
do. It
slide.
is. And I think like for a lot of people and a lot of moms listen to my podcast, they are looking for more time. They are busy. They are stressed. And
Mhm.
if you can kind of look at this honestly and say, okay, this might be a problem in my life, I could take some of those hours and use them in other ways that I could really benefit from. I feel
Mhm.
like that's a great place to start and a great motivator. So I'd really like to talk more about your book and share about that, because I feel like if you are listening to this and thinking, this is me, I want to be a better role model for my children. I want to be more creative. I want to free up some of my time. Tell us about how people can find you and your book and how that might help them.
Yeah, so you can find me at the West Coast Anxiety Clinic, it's just westcoastanxiety.com. And that's, I think I'm a good resource if there's other stuff going on for you too, if it's not just smartphone stuff. But if you're looking to change your smartphone use, a great first step is to buy the book on Amazon and take the 30-day challenge, right? Like it is a really gentle transition for you, and it's very doable, right? And so the whole challenge is designed to clarify your values, to really help you sink your teeth into what the North Stars are in your sky, and then to create action in your life that aligns with those stars. And I hear you on the wanting more time, right? Like as a parent, as a business owner, as a full-time, like I work full-time, I mom full-time, like that's already two full-time things. And then I wife full-time, and I'm trying to go to Pilates too occasionally, right? Like that sounds amazing. So like I would love more hours in the day, right? And and I think for me, and I think for a lot of us, we get swept into this like social narrative of like do more, 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 and like must optimize and must always be productive and must be producing all the time and must be this and must be like there's so much pressure to run all the time. Like I don't know if you feel that, but like I'm guessing it's a yes, right? And if you're listening and you feel that and you're like, yeah, I feel like I have to run all the time. I'm here to tell you you don't, right? And you're like, whatever, Jennie, you don't live my life. I guarantee if you dropped one thing from your life, nothing would happen. Like nothing would happen. Like if you didn't take the kid to gymnastics just for this 1 week, literally nothing will happen. They'll charge your card, right? But other than that, nothing will happen. Like kid'll be fine. You'll be fine. You'll feel a little uncomfortable, but you'll get that hour back. And there are probably a lot of things in our lives that we can put down, or that we could jog. We could try jogging, or we could just like meander. It doesn't even have to be a full walk, right? It could be like a meander. I think what we find is that the less we do, the more we get done, right? And so this book is actually kind of about that, right? Like how do we slow down this behavior? How do we slow down our lives? How do we start to really squeeze this lemon that is life so that we can get the most out of it? Because right now we're just like squeezing every lemon as fast as we can and like running, and it's not sustainable, right? Like I don't if you're like I know there are times at night where I'm like I can't keep doing it like this, like I can't keep doing it like this. And I think part of why I think I have to do it like this is because what I see online, right? Like the stuff that I'm exposed to really contributes to what I believe about myself and how I have to move through this world and what kind of parent or mother or woman or business owner or therapist I should be, right? Like, and I think when I get a little bit of distance from all of that content, I have an opportunity to just like be, right? Like when I'm distanced from social media, I don't really care that much about the C-section scar.
Yeah.
Like it's really not that big of a deal. But when I'm on it a lot, I'm like, oh, this must go.
Yes.
This must go. Right. And so slowing down, I think, is really important. And my Look Up challenge can help you do that.
Oh, I love that. I cannot wait to look into this book, because I feel like I really want to be setting the right examples for my children as well. And just like there are definite, I like what you said about like the social media and all that comparison, because it's real. Like it's hard not to get sucked into all of that. And then you feel like, I mean, even it could be like the gymnastics example. Why do I have to have my kids in all these activities just because that's the norm in my area? Or, what resonates really with me and my family? What do we need? What's most important to me, not to others? And when you take a step back, I feel like that's so much easier to discover. So thank you so much for sharing all of this. It's so interesting. It's so important. So I am just so grateful that you were able to share with us today.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me on. And I really hope that you and your listeners decide to take the challenge and find something juicy and beautiful and meaningful about it.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode. Please subscribe and review so we can reach more people who want to learn to glow alongside us. See you next time.